Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping straight into a topic that is absolutely fascinating and honestly a bit wild. We're looking at a massive collision between technology, politics, and extreme wealth, all wrapped up in this concept called the network state. On one hand, you've got this super passionate libertarian vision of pure digital sovereignty. We're talking a cloud-first utopia where you 100% opt in to your government. But on the flip side, you have these really sharp socioeconomic critiques warning that, actually, this is just the ultimate highly engineered exit strategy for the ultra-wealthy to escape the welfare state. We're going to map out both sides impartially today, so let's get right into it.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap. We'll be covering the new digital leviathan, escaping the welfare state, the architecture of exit, rise of the exitocracy, elite capture and tax havens, and finally, the future of sovereignty.
All right, Section 1, the new digital leviathan, the shifting forces of human cooperation.
So, to really wrap our heads around the network state movement, we have to zoom out and look at how human society actually organizes itself. The sources use this term, the leviathan, to describe the ultimate organizing force of an era. Think about it like this. Back in the 1800s, the primary leviathan was God. Pro-social behavior was largely enforced by moral codes and, well, the threat of eternal punishment. Then in the 1900s, that shifted to the state. Order was kept through physical force, geographic borders, and strict legal codes. But now, in the 2000s, we are seeing a totally new leviathan take over, and that is the network. Today, rules aren't just enforced by a police officer or a priest, they're enforced by unbreakable encryption, smart contracts, and decentralized consensus.
Okay, so what exactly is a network state? The technologist Balaji Srinivasan, who really popularized this whole idea, defines it as a cloud-first proposition nation. Basically, it starts out as a highly aligned online community. These folks integrate a cryptocurrency, they unite around a shared moral innovation, which could be anything from a shared diet to a belief in radical life extension, and then they literally crowdfund physical territory around the world. The ultimate goal? Gaining actual, legitimate diplomatic recognition from legacy governments.
Moving to Section 2, escaping the welfare state, the ideological push for a digital exit.
You might be wondering, why go through all the trouble of building a new state from scratch? Well, it really comes down to a deep ideological dissatisfaction with the legacy systems we live under right now. The sources point to a foundational text for this whole movement called The Sovereign Individual. It has this pretty blunt quote: "The nation-state inherited from the industrial era is a predatory institution, extracting a huge fraction of the world's total output." Proponents of the network state look at the traditional welfare state and see a system built entirely on coercion. They argue it relies on super monopoly tax rates that specifically target the most productive citizens, and they believe the information age has finally given us the tools to just walk away.
This brings us to a really crucial political concept in all this: voice versus exit. Historically, if you were unhappy with your government, your main tool was voice. You voted, you protested, you argued to try and change the legacy system from the inside. But network state proponents, they think forcing people into the voice model is incredibly slow and completely outdated. They champion exit. Their logic is, why spend decades arguing in a messy 51% democracy when digital tech allows you to just seamlessly exit, take your assets with you, and join a new jurisdiction that is 100% voluntary and opt-in?
Section 3. The architecture of exit. Building the infrastructure of a new sovereignty.
So how do you actually execute a massive uncoupling from physical nations? It doesn't just happen overnight. The sources outline a very specific startup-like progression here. First, you have a startup society, just an online community hanging out. Then it formalizes into a network union that can take collective action. After that, it scales into a network archipelago. This is when the community starts crowdfunding real physical land. Maybe it's a bunch of apartments, some cul-de-sacs, or even small islands all over the globe. But they are all connected by a shared digital login. Finally, once it has enough scale and economic muscle, it knocks on the door of legacy governments and asks for diplomatic recognition to become a true network state.
I absolutely love this visceral, almost mad scientist metaphor the sources use to describe the tech powering all of this. They describe translating digital intent into physical reality as tricking rocks into thinking using lightning and explicit text. They are talking about taking silicon rocks, pumping electrical current through them, and using strict deterministic code to orchestrate the real world. They call this the semiotic bridge. It's the exact point where messy human desires get translated into flawless, strict machine execution. And the technical toolkit to make this happen is getting seriously advanced. The sources mention specific protocols like ERC7827, which gives you bit-perfect tracking of smart contracts, bypassing all the bloat of normal visual interfaces. They use LIFO data structures to perfectly verify off-chain physical actions. But the absolute core of this is cryptographic sovereignty. In a network state, you don't need a physical military. Your private cryptographic keys are your ultimate defense. The logic is simple. If a legacy state cannot guess your password, they literally cannot seize your assets.
Section 4. Rise of the Exitocracy, the critical reality of non-democratic cities. Okay, so this all sounds incredibly high-tech and liberating to its supporters, right? But as this movement pushes toward creating what are essentially privatized, non-democratic cities, the backlash is getting intense. Critics have actually coined a counter-concept here, the exitocracy. An exitocracy is a governance model where your democratic voice is completely stripped away and replaced by the absolute right of exit. In these systems, you don't get to vote to change the rules. You are ruled by what critics call a founder king, and if you happen to disagree with whatever the founder decrees, well, your only option is to pack up your digital tokens and leave. The Collective Intelligence Project delivers a really stark warning about this dynamic. They say, we get less Star Trek and more Game of Thrones. Citizens are ruled by a founder king and enforced by a blockchain-enforced contract. Critics are deeply, deeply concerned that instead of a diverse society learning to compromise and live together, people are just going to be recruited into strict, feudal-like enclaves based on a single ideological commandment. It is basically digital serfdom monitored and enforced by rigid code.
Let's contrast this. A traditional nation-state maintains order through a monopoly on physical violence, and it operates within very strict geographic borders. But critics argue that a network state isn't really solving the monopoly problem. It's just trading one monopoly for another. Instead of violence, the founder kings hold a total monopoly on network access. They operate across non-territorial digital borders, and crucially, their governance is entirely financialized, which brings us to a massive, massive point of contention.
Section 5. Elite capture and tax havens, corporate sovereignty, and hidden wealth.
So how is this entire architecture actually being leveraged by the billionaire caste? Well, critics argue that despite all the preaching about decentralized transparency, these frameworks are practically being used as incredibly sophisticated tax evasion strategies. The sources highlight real-world examples, like a political operation in Los Angeles called Neighbors First. They use these complex, nesting doll shell structures to completely shield donor identities. It's all about fudging or hedging your jurisdiction, so that your wealth and transactions become invisible to the legacy nation-state. And in some proposed systems, like Liberland for example, political voting power is quite literally tied to your financial contributions. So you end up with these exclusionary digital oligopolies, where the ultra-wealthy can just outright buy the rules.
And this number right here tells a really compelling story about the underlying financial motives. In the venture capital world, the same world heavily funding these non-democratic network cities, 90% of successful exits are achieved through corporate acquisitions. Critics point to this and argue that it reveals the true reality of the movement. It isn't just about building philosophical utopias. It is a highly calculated exit strategy for realizing massive financial value by liquidating assets away from the taxation and regulatory oversight of democratic nations.
Finally, Section 6. The future of sovereignty. The global collision of physical and digital.
So where does this global collision actually leave us? Just to summarize the core ideological battle we've unpacked today, proponents see a future of 100% voluntary democracy, while critics see the rise of unregulated digital oligarchies. Proponents see vital protection from predatory states, critics see high-tech tax evasion and elite capture. Proponents champion cryptographic freedom, and critics warn of a devastating loss of societal pluralism. As Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin points out in the sources, just abandoning our legacy systems to build high-cost private enclaves doesn't actually solve our share of global political problems. Which leaves us with this final, massive question. Are network states the ultimate expression of human freedom, pushing us toward this frictionless digital frontier? Or are they just a highly engineered digital escape hatch for the ultra-wealthy to avoid paying into the very societies that built them? It's a tension that is absolutely going to define the next century of governance. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the architecture around you, and I will see you next time.